Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. Let's take a look at the Gospels, four Gospel account of Jesus Christ. As a man would understand, we have different things. Let's remember this. The culture of the original writers and readers were from Jewish orientation, from Roman orientation, from Greek orientation, and then the rest of the world. And what is the rest of the world? The rest of the world is the Jews, Romans, and Greeks mixed together and spread out across the earth and become different languages, different modes, different type of people, different type of actions, different type of ways, and words mean a little different in different areas. So it's very difficult for you or I to find the right Bible in the sense of the word of human hunting. But if we're hunting through the Spirit, a common language for everybody would be the King James Version Bible. It has the common language that fits everybody because it's made up of all four of these things and put together. And then God took the most prominent word and used a group of men to pin it down and to make it. Now we see in Matthew that Jesus is portrayed, or Christ is portrayed, as king and lion-like. And he was. He was king of the earth and still is, and he is lion-like. And then in Mark he was a servant and ox-like, and he was also that. He walked across this earth. He did things. He carried his own cross on his shoulder. And if there was no other thing in his whole life that portrayed him ox-like, that did. But he did many other things. He was also the perfect man and man-like. He was God, yet he was man-like. He was in the flesh, and he looked like man, and he acted like man, and he was God in the flesh as man. He was the mighty God, and he was eagle-like. When you talk about eagle-like, you're talking about the top of the chain of birds. Every bird has an eagle. And the human people have an eagle. And the eagle the human people have is Jesus Christ. He was the top of all humanity. He was the guy that did not sin, that came on the earth. He was an angelic redeemer. Revelation 4 and Ezekiel 1. In Matthew, he was the first creature of lion-like people to conquer the devil. And the second creature, the ox-like, was the physical power that he used as well as spiritual power. And that third thing in Luke that we saw, in Ezekiel and in Proverbs and in Revelation, is that he was the man like God. And the fourth thing that he was, again, the eagle like God. Now, the style of writing is going to fit everybody if you'll get into it. If I say you or I say thee, well, we don't usually say thee. But if you study the Bible, when you say thee, you know it means you. And so, as you study, so that style of writing, and that's the emphasis by the writer. And then we see the teacher, that was his sermons as he taught. And then we see the preacher, that was his miracles that he did. As he walked across the country, he did these miracles. And then we see his parables. His parables is a story with a actual end connotation to it. And then we see the theological side. Now, the parables were put out, historians like to study those. But the theological side, or for the theologian, is his doctrines. Every time he opened his mouth, he either fulfilled a doctrine, or he was in the middle of a doctrine, or he finished a doctrine and started one. And that's what he was. And, and as you know, the cultures that we talked about a few minutes ago, he walked on all of these grounds. He walked on Jewish ground, he walked on Roman ground, he walked on Greek ground, and he preached to all of them. And the genealogical record is found in Matthew 1 through 17, and he was the king, and he must be the king. He was the king, and he must be the king. And he was the king. Yet he became a servant and did what he was asked for people and whatever. In Luke 3:23 through 38, he was the perfect man, yet he was Christ walking on the earth, and he was the perfect man. And since then, there's not been another. There have been many claimed to be, but they have not been. The root of him is traced in the fleshly part, traces him in the regal part of his life, the line of David, through his son Solomon. And as the perfect man, he's traced physically from the line of David through another son, Nathan. So you've got a physical and a spiritual part coming down together. Both of them are together. And the fruit leads to Joseph and the legal stepfather of Jesus. This is the fruit of what Mary had comes through the stepfather comes along and agrees with Mary, stays with her, walks through, and he is the stepfather of Jesus. And this leads to Mary, the physical mother of Christ. Now the place that we're going to look at, and I've been really this week studying this map and studying where Jesus walked and everywhere, in Capernaum in Galilee. This is in the area of Jerusalem. But when you say the area of Jerusalem, Jesus went as much as 188 miles up. And then he went down, which was, I forgot now exactly how many miles it was, to Egypt. So he went both ways, and then he went across. And the two-told division is the Synoptic Gospels. They stress the humanity of Christ. And that's the fourth Gospel stresses the deity of Christ. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John, he has the deity of Christ. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about him going to the places where he went. He left Jerusalem, and he went up, and he came back, and he went up, and he came back. It's amazing to me how many trips, that 100-mile trips and 88-mile trips and stuff that Jesus made walking. Perhaps we don't see the fact that he may have rode on a mule. We know that in that day, many rode on a mule, side saddle or straddled. But they rode on mules, and they could do it, and the mule can trek further than a man can in a day. And without the exhaustion of the man, let's put it that way. And then the man can be ready to be able to preach and to talk. The four biographers, which was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each presents a different picture of the Savior. Now, these are four different men with four different backgrounds, four different ways of speaking and writing and thinking. And you take any four men today and put them in the same place, give them 5 words and say, you write me a piece on these 5 words. The likelihood of any of them writing the same thing on those 5 words would be astronomical against it. Yet, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were writers that wrote similarity to each other, good enough so that the story is told by any one of them is the same story, even though it differs a little bit in them. Look at it this way. Suppose I'm down there at the feeding of the 5,000, and there are 5,000 people there, Can you imagine a crowd of 5,000 people on the land? And you're way down here. You're a half a mile down the road. And then the other person's a half a mile down the road this way. And there's two other people, and they're a quarter of a mile. And then there's somebody close up. And you tell the story, and that guy, you tell a story from this angle. He tells a story from that angle. This guy tells a story from this angle, and the other guy tells a story from right in the front. It's all the same story. A lot of people say, well, their disciples couldn't agree with each other. Oh, they agreed perfectly with each other. They just saw it from 3 or 4 different angles. And when you're looking at something from 4 different angles, that's the way it is. Police today have a real hard time. They'll say, was there anybody here that's a witness on the street corner? And the guy will step up and he'll say, yeah, that was a purple car that hit that red car. Another guy will say, that was a blue car that hit that orange car. Well, you got 2 different stories from 2 different people for the same accident. Well, this is the way it is looking at Matthew, the king, the lion light, is written in Hebrew. Now, Mark, the servant, the ox light, is written in Roman, the Roman language, and as the Romans would write. And then Luke, the perfect man, man-like, written to the Greeks. Let me tell you something about Luke. Luke was an ardent historian. He was I wish I could get the word in my head that he was, but he was everything exact. It had to be exact. It had to be exact. If Luke wrote it, it was exact. And that's the way he was. We got a preacher like that. He sprang from on the high, and he hath visited us, he said. And he tells us how to identify the Savior. And if you'll go and see Numbers 24:17, Malachi 4:2, upon reaching maturity, John retires to the desert and begins preparing for his future as a Nazarite evangelist. This is very interesting if you were to study that and to study that. But let's get back down here to John the Mighty. John, the mighty God, the eagle-like, written to all the world thus. So John took all of the other cultures together and wrote in a language that put them all so we can understand them together. And there is a genealogy in Matthew for a king. We must have a king. There must be a king. There is a genealogy in Luke for the perfect man, and that king must be a perfect man. And there is a genealogy in Mark for the servant. And every king that is a mighty man, he must also have a side to him that's a servant side. And nobody, by being just the boss without a servant side, was ever good, any good. Or just a straight out rude, ugly boss. That's what the devil is. The devil doesn't have a servant side. He doesn't serve except for his what makes him better. That's what he's interested in. And so our time has come and gone. These are 15-minute excerpts, and we're right at the door. But this is Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. If you've never said, Jesus, I'm a sinner, forgive me of my sin, come in my heart and save my soul, you need to do that. You can be religious and be lost. You can know the Bible from cover to cover and be lost. If you're not walking in it, and if you're just walking on it and on what it says, then you can be lost. So you need to ask Jesus to forgive you of your sin, come in your heart, save your soul. Then you can have the Bible in you. And that's what you need, to have the Bible in you. And that way there, you'll go to heaven when you die and not hell.